It was just quiet until there was this lady from the back of the plane who just kind of screamed. Her scream just triggered the panic. Everyone started screaming too, shouting, praying at the top of their lungs. It was pandemonium. The day of the crash, I was still on my school campus. So this was a crowd of students that I was used to traveling with. We've been doing this trip for at least 3, 4 years. When the plane finally arrived, we boarded and everything was normal. So after waiting for a while for the plane to arrive, myself and 60 other students from my school, including one of my close friends, many of my friends were on that plane. We boarded the plane. And this is a flight that is typically like an hour and a half. There were 109 passengers total. So this was a regular commercial flight. The flight was really normal for the most part, uneventful like flights should be. And then about 15, 20 minutes left in the flight, we started the descent. And the pilot made that announcement they typically make on the intercom about how we're about to descend. We're going to arrive at the airport soon, all that stuff. And that was when the turbulence started. Sometimes it happens, but when it does, you don't freak out because it's just typical. So that was the mood at first. There was nothing weird. It was just going. And then it started getting worse, and worse, and just really exaggerated and just very dramatic. And I remember palpable tension in the air, like in the cabin, where no one was saying a word, no one was saying a thing. But you could just tell that we were all thinking the exact same thing, like, what is going on? This feels weird and like too much, like what's happening? So it was just quiet until there was this lady from the back of the plane who just kind of screamed. And I think her scream just triggered like the panic. Everyone started screaming too, shouting, praying at the top of their lungs, shouting God, shouting Jesus. Like it was pandemonium. And of course, we were all still strapped into our seats. There was no running around or anything like that. It was just the screaming and the panicking. And I remember just sitting down in my seat, just shell shocked and very confused because, this is not supposed to happen. It's like you watch movies where this kind of thing happens, but that's a movie. Like, you don't ever think about that becoming reality. You don't prepare for that kind of scenario. So I was just confused and I felt like it felt so surreal, like I was in a movie, like I was watching this happen. And I remember turning to look at my friend. So I was in an aisle seat and she was in the aisle seat next to mine, right? And she's looking at me, she's panicking, her eyes are huge. And she's like, what do we do? What is this? And I'm like, I don't know, maybe we should pray. And I remember holding her hand from across the aisle. And that's the last person I saw, the last thing that I did right before there was this like metal scraping sound that was just like jarring, like inside my head. And then just darkness. And my next memory after that, my next vivid memory after that is opening my eyes and I'm lying down. I'm looking up at a white ceiling and I'm in a hospital bed. I'm waking up from a coma, and 5 weeks have passed since the accident. That was, I suppose, the end of one life and the start of another. I eventually found out that there were two people who survived. Of course, they told me this way later, like 4 months into my treatment, because, they have to wait until you're psychologically ready to give you that kind of news. I ended up sustaining third-degree burns over 65% of my body, which just means everything from my head to my toes burned except for my tummy and my back. My recovery was a long journey. I would say the first 7 months were the most critical because when I first arrived at the hospital, I was given a 30% chance of survival based on the severity of my injuries. Keeping me alive was really the first step. 24 hours after the accident happened, I was flown to South Africa, Johannesburg, to be treated at a hospital called Mill Park Hospital. That was the closest hospital that had the level of medical care that was necessary to care for the level of burns that I had. Nigeria did not have that in place. And I stayed there for about 7 months before I came back to Nigeria and then eventually came to America and patched me back together, literally. But America gave me back my independence. They're two very different phases in my life, equally important, but very different. So the first 4 months were the most painful, the most difficult, emotionally, physically, spiritually moments of my life. All the growth and the understanding and everything that had to be done and the healing that had to be done during that time, it was extremely exhausting, intense, and extremely necessary. South Africa, everything that happened there set the tone for what kind of person I was going to be post-accident. The physical pain and healing is the most obvious and, quite frankly, the easiest part of everything. Of course, it was extremely hard. Nothing happens overnight. The entire process of believing in myself and of understanding, being secure in my identity took a while. It took a long time. I had a lot of growing to do, and it was just a very gradual process. And there were different levels to it, to different steps. There was, first of all, reconciling, with my current physical appearance, and kind of deciding what role that would play in who I was as a human being. And then there was the itching, which was just a demon in and of itself, and something that I still deal with till today. The pain was bad, but the itching for me was the worst thing to come out of having these scars. Another factor was dealing with depression. I didn't deal with survivor's guilt. I never felt like I didn't deserve to be alive, or that it should have been someone else, not me. That was never a thought process that I had. At that point in my life, I wasn't exactly like the most I guess devout Christian. I just kind of believed what my family believed, but I was starting to have this interest in learning more about God after the accident happened. During this time in South Africa, my curiosity kept growing because I was surrounded by people who kept telling me that he was the one who saved me from this, and he was the reason I was alive. Just basically teaching me that prayer is important and it can help. There's only so much that medication can do. The morphine and all those drugs, of course, they can help me physically, take away my pain, take away my itching sometimes, all these things. There were parts of me on the inside that were not at peace, that I felt that maybe the peace would be accessible through God. During my time in the hospital, when my mom would just like read scripture to me, or she would pray over me, there would be this feeling of calm that would come over me that, was almost like meditative, So I would just think, these were things that at least like lulled me to sleep or helped me feel like more comfortable inside, And so after a while, when I realized that, I would like more of that, then I felt like maybe there's something there. If I explore for myself, maybe I'll find more of this peace on the inside. And so in the midst of learning all about that, I then hear eventually the truth about the accident being that everyone was gone. And at that point, up until then, I had assumed everyone else was alive. So to find out that everyone was gone was so confusing to me. It was depressing and heartbreaking, and more just confusing, because here I am learning about this God that could do all these things, and he would let 60 kids die. It just made no sense to me. It didn't correlate with what I was learning about him. That took there was a lot of effort made into helping me kind of understand God in a different way. And I think the turning point for me was one day I was talking with my mom, and kind of told me, basically, bad things happen to good and bad people equally, and being a Christian does not change that. That was something that was extremely important for me to understand, because up until that point I had believed that believing does not exempt you from suffering. When you're a human being, you live in this world. This world is flawed. Bad things will happen, and when those bad things happen, it does give you a place to go to. I think that was an outlook that changed everything for me. Understanding that he's not the cause of bad things, but he's a place to go to when bad things happen. And I think that that's the difference in believing in something bigger than you, higher than you. That was a perspective that changed everything for me, honestly. And once I started seeing God in that way and understanding faith in that way, it made me less angry. It made me see him more as like a healer, a comforter, as opposed to like a problem solver. And it helped me kind of see the lives that were lost in a different way, as opposed to being crippled by the sadness that came with knowing that my friends were gone, and all those parents had lost their kids. I was able to see my life, the one good thing that came out of this horrible situation. I could see my life as something that those other people who lost their loved ones could hold on to, as almost like a life that was being lived for many. I wanted my life to represent the lives of those 60 angels, which is what they ended up being called just in general in Nigeria. And this did not mean that I had to do anything extraordinary. I just felt like whatever I ended up doing, whatever it is, whether it's mundane or incredible, whatever it is, I want to do it well. I want to just live as excellently as possible, whether it's a regular, normal life or an incredible life. And I felt like that would be the best way to honor them, to honor the memories. It would be such a loss if I were to live in depression. I felt like it would be a waste of a life that was saved, despite so many losing theirs. Those parents, like, they latched on to me, to my life, and they needed me to survive this, and they never once like made me feel a type of way for surviving. I never got, why you and why not my kid. I never got that from any of them, but they just saw my life as a beacon. And at every single step, every milestone, they were there to encourage me. These were all different things that happened in South Africa. So when I say that that was a very important time in my life, it was, not just because they saved my life, literally, but because the quality of life that I wanted to live was pretty much decided there. Was a gift. I felt like my life was a gift. By the time I got to America, I had had close to 100 surgeries already. But I'm really grateful that I didn't, like, lose my ability to, like, walk or hold things. I mean, of course, I had to relearn how to walk again and all that. And I had to learn how to use my hands. I couldn't use my hands when I first came to America. I just couldn't, because of the way that the injuries had healed in a very, like, non-functional way. Like, so that was one of the major surgeries I did when I came here that gave me back my mobility. So that's why I always say that America gave me back my independence, because the surgeries I did here were very practical, were very focused on giving me back my movements and my ability to just do things for myself. And there's a lot of things that we take for granted, as just human beings living life, going through every day, that became milestone moments for me every time I could do those things. So there was also this new appreciation for the little things that happened throughout this entire process. Going back out into the world was a very gradual process. It was a very gradual transition. So I never felt like I was like all of a sudden just kind of pushed out there and forced to kind of deal with the ramifications of that, or like deal with like the overstimulation that may come from that. And my family had a lot to do with this. So when I say that, I mean I didn't wait to be well to start going out. I was going out while I was still in a wheelchair, for instance. So in the beginning, when we first moved to America, we would go out sometimes as a family. Sometimes I would be able to walk around very slowly, but possible. And sometimes, most times actually, I would be in a wheelchair, like my family would be moving me around like that. So I did get to see the world, and go out and interact with people. But in those times when I was still in the wheelchair and I was that sick, it was really hard to care about anyone else. I was just here trying to be out for as long as possible without being exhausted. I was very inward focused at that time and too much into my healing to be concerned about how anyone else was seeing me. And as time passed and my surgeries continued with Shriners, I got better. I could walk. Of course, I'm aware that people stare and stuff, especially in the beginning, like, of course they would. And America is like even better than Nigeria, because Nigeria, like, people are more obvious about their staring and would come up to you and ask you questions. And in some ways that could be better than just like the silent staring. But I will say, Americans just don't like to offend and want to just kind of leave you to your, like, they don't know how you're going to take whatever they might say, so they don't want to say anything. And so I think just a lot of times I'll just get stares, but no one will really do anything or harass me or anything. I tend to see the other point of view very easily. So if it were someone else who looked like me, I would probably stare too. So just knowing that it was not unusual for people to stare at someone who didn't look usual or normal, I mean, it helped me also just kind of just put it out of my mind. Like, people will stare, it's whatever. No one ever stopped me from living my life and doing what I wanted to do because I look different. So if all I got was stares, then it's definitely okay. Aside from that, my experience was pretty normal. I went everywhere I wanted to go within reason. As I got better, I could go to more places. My energy levels increased. I could do more. Amusement parks were always a fun thing for me, still are. And, I just did all these things and enjoyed all these things with no limitations, really. So after I got back my independence, I was able to, first of all, continue school. So I went back to high school, went to college. So basically, I kind of lived my life and did things the same way I would have had the accident not happened. So not to act like it didn't happen, but to not allow the fact that it happens deter me from doing the things that I would just normally have always done. For me, what that looked like was school, college, job, then just in between doing some fun stuff. Music just healed parts of me that like surgery just could not reach, almost kind of like the same way like I would say my faith did. It was very much a very emotional thing. It was cathartic to express myself in this special way. I loved it with everything in me. And so being able to have that as part of my healing, as part of my therapy, was a big deal to me. I believe that there are certain qualities that I always had in me that were definitely, those qualities were kind of enhanced post-accident. In fact, because of the accident, there's a certain disposition I had just in general, like my personality, and certain traits that I think just kind of were forced to expand because of the accident. There were a lot of sink or swim moments for me. Being optimistic, being very glass half full, just believing that things will work out eventually. They just have to at some point. If I'm alive, then God's not done. If I'm here, then there must be more I can do. If I'm here, then I guess I'm meant to be here. If I'm doing better, then I guess tomorrow can be better. It's just thinking that, trying always reminding myself that now the way things are now does not represent how it's always going to be. And this is when it's good or bad. Good things don't last forever, but neither do bad things if you survive them. Understanding that beauty is not skin deep, understanding that there's more to a person than what they look like on the outside, understanding that our scars and our trauma do not define who we are. We live in a world that is extremely judgmental and will tell you how to feel about yourself if you let it. So if you don't know who you are before you get out there, it's just going to be really difficult to navigate, and life is hard enough. So I was really grateful to know who I was and to be secure in myself despite looking nothing like what society would conventionally call beautiful. Being okay with that and not letting that stop me from living life and being free. I look like a different person, but I'm not a different person. I feel like the same person. I think that was really, yeah, like it was just kind of like, oh, like light bulb moment. So basically, all these things that I am don't have to go away just because my appearance has changed. I think that was like a major light bulb moment for me. And I don't think it's because I'm special or anything like that, but I think it's just it's a human thing. I think traumatic situations tend to have that effect on the survivor, where you unfortunately, gain perspective that you may never have gained had you not experienced your trauma. So I think that's a common thing that happens. Authenticity is the answer to a lot of questions and a lot of problems. Oftentimes, things fall into place in a person's life if they are living as authentically as possible or presenting their most authentic self to the world in every situation, in every environment, every scenario. And I think that is the reason why it's one of the most difficult things to achieve or to attain as human beings. And achieving it for me has always been an act of self-love. It's an act of being kind to yourself, to allowing yourself to have flaws and understanding that having flaws is being human. So my book is called More Than My Scars. I released it last year. It's essentially my story. It's a memoir. It's my burn survivor journey, everything I've learned along the way in basically this entire interview, but like in so much more detail. And, it's the nitty gritty stuff, not just like all the nice things I've been saying here. These are all everything that I'm saying here is the consequence, the result of a lot of hard work. It took a lot to get to this place and this mindset, this perspectives that I have.